My name is Clara Voss, and I am 38 years old. I have 2 daughters, a mortgaged house in Bend, Oregon, and a cardboard box in my garage that I have been meaning to go through for 3 years. Inside that box are 81 photographs from my childhood, a stack of birthday cards in my mother's handwriting, a copy of my grandmother's will, and a manila folder held shut with a rubber band that has started to crack from age. That folder is why I am here. On the day we buried my husband Daniel, my family sold my grandmother's house. Not the next day. Not the week after. The same day. While I was standing at the graveside in November rain, holding my daughter's hands, my mother and my brother were 40 minutes away at a notary's office signing documents on a property that my grandmother had, in her own handwriting, left to me. I did not know for 11 days. Before we get into how I found out and what happened after, if you are new here, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I read every single one. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the day Daniel died. That part comes later, and I will get there. But first you need to understand the house, and you need to understand my family, because one explains the other. Denton, Nebraska. Population 6,000 if you count the university students and the people who live out on Route 40 and drive in for church on Sundays. One main street, 2 hardware stores that have been competing since 1962, a grain elevator you can see from anywhere in town, and a post office that closes at noon on Fridays no matter what. That was where I grew up. That was where my grandmother, Evelyn Ruth Voss, had lived in the same white farmhouse on Creekside Road since 1971. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a screened porch that faced west, and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and the lavender dish soap she ordered from a catalog every spring. She had a garden in the backyard that produced more tomatoes than any one person could eat, so she gave them away. She kept a basket on the porch labeled FREE tomatoes and refilled it every morning in August. My grandmother was not a rich woman by any conventional measure. She had a teacher's pension, a paid-off house, and enough in savings to cover her own end-of-life costs without burdening anyone. What she had that mattered was the house itself. In 2022, farmland-adjacent property in Denton County had appreciated enough that the house and its half-acre were worth roughly $340,000. It was the single most valuable asset in our family's orbit, and she left it to me, not to my mother, Patricia. Not to my brother, Garrett. To me. Clara Evelyn Voss. Named for my grandmother's middle name, her oldest granddaughter, the one who drove out to Denton from wherever we were living every Thanksgiving for 20 years without missing a single one. I know why she left it to me. Grandma Evelyn never said it out loud in my lifetime, but the will said it plainly enough. Her attorney, a man named Harold Birch, who had handled her affairs for 30 years, told me later that she had been deliberate. She had updated the will twice in her final decade, the second time 6 months before she died, and both times the language was the same. The house at 4 Creekside Road, all contents, and the adjoining parcel to my granddaughter, Clara Evelyn Voss. She knew what she was doing. She also knew my family. My mother, Patricia, was the oldest of 3 children. My grandmother's daughters and son had all inherited the same steady temperament, the same quiet practicality, the same Midwestern sense that you did not complain if you could just fix the problem instead. Patricia was the only one who had turned out differently. Patricia complained. Patricia fixed nothing. Patricia had opinions about everything and stakes in whatever could benefit her. And she ran her household on a kind of emotional scorekeeping that nobody could ever fully win. My father, Gordon, had died when I was 11, a cardiac event in the parking lot of the bank where he worked for 17 years. Patricia had grieved him loudly and then, within 2 years, had reorganized her identity around her grief in a way that required everyone around her to manage it continuously. She wore widowhood the way some women wear good jewelry. Visible, curated, always appropriate to the occasion. My brother Garrett was 4 years younger and had spent his entire adult life being managed by Patricia without knowing it. He was not a cruel person. He was a weak one, which in certain family systems amounts to the same thing. He did whatever she asked because disagreeing required more energy than he had ever been willing to spend. When she told him things, he believed them, When she told him what to do, he did it. When she framed it as family loyalty, he did not look for the exits. I was not like Garrett. I never had been. I was the one who pushed back, who asked why, who wanted the reasoning before I agreed. Patricia called this difficult. My grandmother called it clear-eyed. I knew which one of them was right. I met Daniel at 24 at a work conference in Denver. He was a structural engineer from Bend. I was a project coordinator from wherever the contract was at the time, which in those years was usually somewhere flat and windy. He had a calm about him that was not passivity. It was the kind of calm that comes from knowing what you think and not needing to broadcast it. He listened when you talked, not while he was forming his next sentence. Actually listen. On our second date, he told me what he remembered from our first conversation, almost verbatim, and I had to set down my fork because no one had ever done that before. We married at 27 in a ceremony that Patricia attended while visibly cataloging everything she would have done differently. The venue, the flowers, the fact that Daniel was from Oregon and not from Nebraska, the fact that I was moving away and not staying close. She made her feelings known not through arguments but through sighs, through careful pauses before answering simple questions, through the way she hugged me goodbye that weekend. Just slightly shorter than a real hug, just barely enough to count. Daniel noticed. He never made a production of it. He just quietly began paying attention. We moved to Bend. Daniel's firm was there, and I found work in project management easily enough. We bought a house. We had 2 daughters, Nora, born when I was 30, and June, born when I was 33. They grew up in Oregon with mountains visible from the kitchen window, and a backyard that Daniel built a deck for over 2 weekends, and a garage that I turned into a home office when the pandemic made it necessary. We were happy. I do not say this the way people say it looking back with the soft focus filter of loss. I say it because it was true in real time, on ordinary days, on the days when nothing happened, which were most of them, and also the best ones. My grandmother called every Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific time without fail. She had written the time difference on a note card taped to her phone. She asked about the girls by name and remembered everything they told her. She sent cards for every birthday, holiday, and first day of school. When Nora lost her first tooth, a card arrived within 5 days with a dollar bill and a note in Evelyn's slanted script that said, "Keep it somewhere safe. Teeth are harder to get the second time." Nora still has that dollar. Patricia called when she needed something or when she had news she wanted to be the one to deliver. I noticed the difference. I did not make a production of it. I just paid attention. Daniel's diagnosis came in March, 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, found during what we thought was a gallbladder issue. The oncologist was a careful woman who spoke without softening the numbers, which I respected because I needed the numbers to be right. She outlined options, timelines, probabilities. Daniel listened the same way he always listened, completely, and then asked 3 precise questions. I held his hand and did not cry until we were in the car. We told the girls first. Nora was 14, old enough to understand, and she understood with a maturity that broke my heart. June was 11 and cried for an hour and then announced she was going to research clinical trials, which she did, from a library book and several dubious websites, and which I did not discourage because she needed to feel useful, and she was right that research mattered. We told our friends. We told Daniel's family, his parents in Bend, his sister in Portland. They were present and steady and showed up when we needed them without being asked. I called my mother. She said, "Oh my goodness, Clara." I heard her light a cigarette, a habit she had maintained since the 90s. She said, "What do the doctors say?" I told her. She said, "Well, these doctors today are so much better than they used to be. I am sure they will figure something out." She did not ask what she could do. She did not offer to come. She asked if I had called Garrett, which was, I understood, a logistical question about information control, not a gesture of solidarity. Garrett called that evening. He was kind in his way, which was to say he was uncomfortable and tried to fill the discomfort with cheerfulness. He said, "Let us know if there is anything we can do." I thanked him. I did not expect anything to come of it, and nothing did. In the following 8 months, Patricia visited once, for 5 days in July. She stayed at a hotel because she said our spare room was too small, though it was not. She came to the house every day, which Daniel and I appreciated, but she spent a meaningful portion of each visit telling Daniel about other people she knew who had recovered from cancer. People whose cancers were not the same cancer. People whose diagnoses bore no resemblance to his, as if optimism delivered at volume was a treatment plan. Daniel was gracious in a way that still astonishes me. He thanked her each time. On her last evening, she and I sat on the deck after the girls had gone to bed and Daniel was resting. She had a glass of wine. I had tea. She looked at the mountains, at the dark outline of them against the fading sky. And then she said, "Clara, what are you going to do, financially, if the worst happens?" I told her we were managing, that we had life insurance savings, that I was working, that we had thought about it. She nodded, swirled her wine, and said, "Your grandmother's house is worth quite a bit now, you know." Garrett looked it up. Property values out there have gone up considerably. I looked at her. I said, "I know. Grandma left it to me." A pause. She said, "Well, left it to the family, really. We have all discussed it. It would not be fair for just one person to benefit." I said, "Mom, the will is specific. I have a copy." Harold Birch sent it to all of us after she passed. She said, "Wills can be contested, Clara. Intentions can be misunderstood." I went inside and refilled my tea and stayed in the kitchen for 4 minutes before I felt steady enough to go back out. When I did, she had changed the subject to the girls' school and I let her, because I was too tired for the version of the conversation that came next. She left the following morning. I walked her to her rental car. She hugged me, the same just barely hug, and said, "You know I love you and that I want what is best for all of you." I said I knew. I drove back inside, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and looked up Harold Birch's office number. I saved it under contacts. I did not know why, not exactly. The part of me that saves receipts and labels files told me to. I held on. Daniel died on November 9th, a Thursday, at home, in our bedroom, with me and Nora and June beside him. It was quiet in the way that some enormous things are quiet, the stillness after an enormous sound. He had been declining for 6 weeks by then, and yet the moment was still impossible, still sudden, still the kind of thing that makes no sense no matter how much time you have had to prepare. The girls were extraordinary. I do not have a better word. Nora held his hand and talked to him in the last hours, telling him about her week, about a book she was reading, about the way the light came through her window in the morning. June sat on the other side and was quiet, which was unusual for her, and it was the most precise expression of love I had ever seen from an 11-year-old. His parents arrived that evening. His sister drove through the night from Portland. They stayed a week. They helped with food and logistics and the 10,000 small tasks of early grief. His mother, Helen, was the kind of woman who asked what you needed and then did exactly that without commentary. She helped me write the obituary at the kitchen table at midnight with hot tea and no opinions about word choice. She was what a family member was supposed to be in that moment. Mine were not there. Patricia had sent flowers the day before. A large arrangement with white lilies that arrived via a florist app. The card read, "Thinking of you all in this difficult time, love, Mom." She did not come. She said the flights were expensive and she was not sure about her back and she did not want to be in the way. Garrett sent a text message that said, "So sorry, Clara. Let me know if there is anything I can do." I thanked him. I did not expect anything to come of it. The funeral was on November 12th, a Saturday, at a chapel in Bend. Daniel was not religious, but he liked old buildings with good acoustics, so the chapel was right. 140 people came. His colleagues, our neighbors, the girls' teachers, friends from 20 years of living. People stood in the back when the seats ran out. His college roommate gave a eulogy that made everyone laugh and then cry within the same minute, which was exactly right. Exactly, Daniel. I stood at the graveside in the rain with Nora on my left and June on my right, and I held both of their hands and I looked at the sky because looking at the ground was not something I was able to do. 40 minutes away in Denton, Nebraska, my mother and my brother were at a notary's office. I did not know for 11 days. I found out because of a property records update. I had set a Google alert on 4 Creekside Road 2 years earlier, after the conversation on the deck, The one where my mother said wills can be contested. I had forgotten I'd done it. But the alert came through on a Wednesday morning while I was sitting at my desk trying to answer condolence emails and figure out what to feed the girls for dinner. The alert was a public record notice from Denton County. A property transfer had been filed. 4 Creekside Road, Denton, Nebraska. Grantor, the estate of Evelyn Ruth Voss, represented by Patricia Ann Voss, executor. Grantee, a limited liability company registered in Nebraska that I had never heard of. Transfer date, November 12th, the same day as Daniel's funeral. I read the notice 3 times. I refreshed the browser. The information did not change. I called Harold Birch's office at 8:47 in the morning. His assistant said he was with a client. I said I need him to call me back today. I said my name. She asked what it was regarding. I said the estate of Evelyn Ruth Voss and a property transfer filed on November 12th. She said she would have him call me. He called at 10:15. He was quiet for a moment after I read him the filing information. Then he said, "Clara, I need to be honest with you. I was not informed of this transfer. I have not participated in any sale or transfer of that property since Evelyn's will was probated. I am going to pull the estate file right now and I am going to need to call you back." He called back at noon. What he told me took 40 minutes to get through fully, and I will give you the condensed version because the legal details matter less than the shape of what happened. My mother had been named executor of my grandmother's estate. This was accurate. My grandmother had trusted her oldest daughter with the administrative responsibilities while leaving the property itself to me. Harold had made this distinction extremely clear in all documentation. The executor's role was to manage the estate's debts and administrative tasks. It did not give her ownership of the property or the right to sell it. What Patricia had done was retain a separate attorney, not Harold, a man in Omaha who had apparently advised her that as executor she had a window in which she could argue the property had not been properly transferred before the estate closed, and that a sale in that window might be defensible on the grounds of estate liquidity, meaning she could claim the estate needed cash and the property was the only asset. This was not accurate. The estate had no outstanding debts. The house had been paid off. But the filing had been made, and the county had recorded it, and the sale had gone through to a limited liability company whose single registered member was, I would learn 2 days later after my own attorney did some research, a shell company connected to a man named Roy Pulaski, the husband of Patricia's closest friend from church. My mother had sold my grandmother's house to her church friend's husband for $280,000, $60,000 below market value, 11 days before the estate was scheduled to formally close with the property transferred to me. She had done it on the day of my husband's funeral. I sat at my desk after I hung up with Harold, and I did not cry. I was very still. Outside my window, the mountains were the same as always, solid and permanent and indifferent to everything happening at ground level. And I thought about my grandmother on the porch with her FREE tomato sign and her lavender dish soap and her Sunday phone calls. And I thought about what she had intended when she wrote my name in that document. She had trusted the wrong person to carry it out, but she had put my name in writing. And writing can be read. I called an estate litigation attorney in Lincoln, Nebraska that afternoon. Her name was Susan Park, and she had been recommended by Harold Birch. She was methodical and unhurried in a way that I recognized immediately as competence rather than casualness. She asked me to tell her everything in order, and I did, and she took notes, and when I finished she was quiet for 10 seconds, and then she said, "This is not a gray area, Clara. What your mother did is a breach of her fiduciary duty as executor. It may also constitute fraud depending on what the Omaha attorney advised her and whether he advised her in good faith. We can challenge this." I asked what challenging it would look like. She told me. It would mean filing in Denton County Probate Court to void the transfer and reverse the sale. It would mean a deposition from my mother and likely from Garrett, who had signed as a witness. It would mean subpoenas for the Omaha attorney's records and communications. It would mean a process that took somewhere between 18 months and 3 years. I said I understand. She asked if I wanted to proceed. I said I did. Then she asked, "Do you have documentation?" "Prior communications. The original will, anything showing that your mother understood the property was yours and intended to circumvent that? I thought about the conversation on the deck, about my mother's voice saying wills can be contested, about the fact that I had saved Harold Birch's number in my phone 2 years ago for a reason I had only half understood at the time. I said, I have some things. Let me start pulling them together. That night, after the girls were asleep, I sat at my desk and I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it in red, Evelyn House, documentation, and I started building a record, the will which Harold emailed me within the hour, the original Google alert from November, the property filing, text from my mother from the summer in which she had mentioned the house's value and the estate and my grandmother's wishes in ways that now read differently than they had at the time. The conversation on the deck I could not document, but I could write it down with a timestamp. Courts sometimes accept contemporaneous notes. I worked until 2 a.m., and then I went to bed and lay in the dark in the room where Daniel had died 1 month ago and thought about what he would have said. He would not have told me what to feel. He would have asked what I needed, and then he would have sat next to me while I figured it out. I figured it out. Patricia called on a Thursday, 3 weeks after I had retained Susan Park and 6 weeks after the funeral. She called at 6 p.m. my time, which was 7 her time, after dinner, the way she always called when she wanted to seem casual. She said, Clara, how are the girls? I said, fine. She said, how are you holding up? I said I was managing. She said, I've been thinking about you all so much. I waited. She said, I wanted you to know that we handled things with the house. The estate is all sorted out. Garrett and I took care of everything so you would not have to worry about it on top of everything else. I said, I know, Mom. I got the county filing alert. A pause. 3 seconds. She said, the estate had some costs. We had to make decisions quickly. Harold was not being very responsive, and we had a timeline issue. I said, Harold has told me he was not contacted. Another pause. Longer. She said, Clara, I want us to be in a good place. I know this has been a hard year. I do not want the house to come between us. Your grandmother would not have wanted that. I want to tell you what happened in my body in that moment. My hands were very still. My voice was very even. I had been a project coordinator for 12 years. I had managed contractors and timelines and stakeholders who told me things that were not true and needed me to track what they actually said versus what the documents said. I knew how to be still and even. I said, Mom, I have retained an estate litigation attorney in Lincoln. Her name is Susan Park. You will be receiving a letter from her office within the week. I would strongly recommend that you retain your own counsel before responding to that letter. The silence on the other end was the longest yet. I counted. 11 seconds? She said, Clara, I am your mother. I said, I know. And Grandma Evelyn left that house to me, in writing, with Harold Birch's witness and with her signature dated 6 months before she passed. I have the document, she said. Evelyn was not always clear in her final years, I said. She called me every Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific and remembered everything my daughters told her and wrote Harold Birch's office to update her will twice in the decade before she died. She was clear. Another silence. Then quietly, almost low enough to miss, we needed that money, Clara. Your father left us so little. Garrett's business has been struggling. I am the one who took care of her at the end. I drove to Denton every other weekend for 4 years. I did not ask you for anything. I let that sit. Then I said, I know you drove to Denton. I know it was hard. If you had come to me and told me you were in financial trouble, I would have listened. But you did not come to me. You went to a notary on the day I buried my husband and you signed over my grandmother's house to your friend's husband's shell company. She said nothing. I said, Susan Park's letter will arrive this week. Get an attorney, Mom. I hung up. I sat at my desk and looked at the folder on my screen. Evelyn House, documentation. 42 items now. Every alert, every filing, every email, every text, every note I had written with a timestamp. 9 weeks of work. I was a project coordinator. I managed records for a living. I closed the laptop and went to sit with the girls. Garrett called 2 days later. He called from his cell, not from the house line, which told me he did not want Patricia to hear the conversation. He said, "Clara, I need to tell you something." I said, "Okay." He said, "I did not know it was the same day as the funeral. I want you to know that. Mom said the notary had one appointment available and the estate window was closing. I did not put the dates together until after." I believed him, not completely, but enough to stay on the line. He said, "I should not have signed. I knew the house was supposed to be yours. I have known since Harold sent the will around. But Mom said there were debts, and she said Harold had made a mistake in the original paperwork, and He stopped. "I just signed." I said, "Garrett, you are going to be deposed?" He was quiet. I said, "Susan Park is going to ask you what you knew and when you knew it and whether you understood the nature of what you were signing. I am telling you this not to threaten you, but because I want you to have time to get your own attorney before that happens." He said, "Is there a way to fix this without it getting legal?" I said, "If the sale is reversed voluntarily by the buyer and the estate recloses correctly, then possibly yes. But that requires Mom to cooperate, and it requires Roy Pulaski's LLC to give back the property at a fair price, and it requires all of that to happen before Susan files in probate court." He said, "I will talk to her." I said, "Garrett, I need you to understand something. I am not doing this to punish anyone. I am doing it because my grandmother wrote my name in a document and trusted it to mean something." He said he understood. He said, "Clara, I am sorry. I know that is not enough." I said, "I know." We hung up. I did not add that call to the documentation folder. It was too sad for the folder. Instead, I wrote a note by hand, dated it, initialed it, and put it in the manila envelope in the cardboard box in my garage. The months that followed were not dramatic in any visible way. Legal processes rarely are from the outside. From the inside, they are a continuous low-grade noise, like a refrigerator that hums slightly too loud. You get used to it. It becomes the sound of the room. Susan Park filed in Denton County Probate Court in January. The buyer's attorney responded in February, arguing that the sale had been conducted in good faith. Susan filed a motion in March challenging the executor's authority to sell a specifically bequeathed asset. The Omaha attorney who had advised my mother retained separate counsel in April, which suggested to Susan that he knew he was exposed. Patricia did not call during those months. Patricia did not text. The silence was a different silence from the one before. Not the silence of disengagement, but the silence of someone who had been advised not to talk to you. Garrett texted once in February. He said he had spoken with a family attorney and had been told his exposure was minimal if he cooperated with the reversal. He said he wanted to cooperate. He said, "For what it is worth, I told Mom it was wrong before we did it. She said I was being sentimental." I read that text 4 times. I did not add it to the folder, but I photographed it and saved the photo. For what it is worth, the girls did not know the details. Nora was 15 and absorbed in her own grief, which was private and complex, and something I tried to hold space for without intruding. June was 12 and angry in the way that grief sometimes presents as anger in practical children, angry at everything that was unfair, which was everything, which is the correct response to losing your father at 11. They knew something was happening with the house. They did not know the rest, not yet. Daniel's mother Helen called every other week. She asked about the girls by name. She remembered what they were reading, what sports Nora was playing, what project June was working on. She asked what I needed, and then she did it. In March, she drove from Bend to spend a long weekend and painted June's room the color June had wanted for 2 years, and assembled a bookshelf for Nora without being asked, and made a pot of soup that lasted 3 days. I watched her move through my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, and I thought about the word family and what it actually described. It described this: a woman who had no biological obligation to show up for my daughters, and who showed up anyway every other week, in every way that mattered. In May, Roy Pulaski's attorney reached out to Susan to discuss a possible settlement. This was not, Susan explained, an admission of wrongdoing from their side. It was a calculation that litigation was expensive and that the case against the executor was strong enough that the property transfer might be voided by a judge anyway, in which case they would be out the money they had already paid my mother. Negotiations took 6 weeks. The resolution was this. The buyer agreed to return the property to the estate at the original sale price, plus carrying costs for the period they had held it. The estate would then formally transfer 4 Creekside Road to me as originally directed by the will. Patricia would repay the estate from the sale proceeds and would be formally removed as executor, with a co-executor, Harold Birch, appointed to oversee the closing. No criminal charges, no civil claims beyond the estate recovery. Clean. It was not the outcome that would have felt most just in an abstract sense. In an abstract sense, what had happened was that my mother had stolen from me on the day I buried my husband. What she deserved in an abstract sense was more than a clean administrative resolution. But I was not interested in abstract justice. I was interested in what my grandmother had intended. And what my grandmother had intended was that I should have the house. I got the house. Susan called me on a Thursday afternoon in June to confirm the paperwork had been filed and the transfer completed. I was at my desk with the window open and the Oregon summer coming in warm and dry and smelling like pine. I said, "Thank you, Susan." She said, "You did the hard part. You documented everything." I said my grandmother was a careful woman. I just tried to be the same. Susan said, "What are you going to do with the house?" I thought about it. The house was in Nebraska, 3 states away, in a town I had left at 18. It needed work. The roof was 13 years old. The screen porch had a rotting board on the south side. The kitchen was the same kitchen it had always been, which was charming but not functional. I said, "I am going to go see it first, with my daughters, and then I am going to decide." She said that sounded right. I drove to Denton in July with Nora and June. We stopped at the Wyoming border for gas and snacks, and June fell asleep across the back seat before we crossed into Nebraska. Nora sat in the passenger seat, and we talked for 2 hours about her father. Really talked, the way we had not been able to in those first months when everything was still raw and incoherent. She told me things about their relationship that I had not known. Small things, the kind of things a daughter tells her mother when she is finally ready. The way he had talked to her about being afraid. The way he had said that being brave was not the same thing as not being scared. It was being scared and doing the thing anyway. I thought I knew everything about Daniel. I did not know everything. There was more of him in those girls than I had been able to see through my own grief. And seeing it there, in Nora at 15 in the passenger seat with Nebraska unfolding ahead of us, was not loss. It was the opposite. We pulled up to 4 Creekside Road at 4 in the afternoon. The house looked the same. Smaller than I remembered, the way childhood homes always shrink, but the same. The porch was still there. The garden in the back had gone untended for 3 years, but the beds were still where they had always been. The tomato frames were rusted and empty. June woke up when we stopped. She pressed her face to the window and said, "Is this it?" I said, "This is it." She said, "It is little." Nora said, "It is perfect." We went inside. The smell was still there. Faint but present, under 3 years of closed windows and still air. Coffee, lavender, wood. The kitchen was exactly the same yellow curtains my grandmother had sewn herself, the same hooks by the back door. The same light fixture in the shape of a wagon wheel that I had thought was ugly at 8 and now could not imagine replacing. We stayed the weekend. We slept in the old bedrooms. June found a box of board games from the 1980s, and we played them at the kitchen table with flashlights when the evening light faded. Nora found a notebook my grandmother had kept, a recipe book, and sat reading it quietly in the living room with her legs over the arm of the chair, the way she always sat. On the last morning, I sat on the screen porch facing west and watched the light come up over the flat land. The same light my grandmother had watched for 50 years from this same porch. I knew what I was going to do with the house. I was going to keep it, not as a rental, not as a financial asset, not as a line item in an estate portfolio. I was going to fix the roof and replace the porch board and update the kitchen and bring the girls back every summer and let them know this place. Let them know her, this woman who called every Sunday and remembered everything and put their great-grandmother's name into a legal document because she knew what she was doing, and she trusted the paperwork to say what she could not always say out loud. My grandmother had left me a house. But what she had actually left me was this: a piece of ground to stand on, a place where the light came from the right direction. Proof that someone had seen me clearly and decided I was the right person. Patricia called in August. I had expected her to call eventually. The legal process had concluded. Her attorney had presumably told her she had no further exposure. There was nothing left to lose by reaching out, which meant there was nothing left to prevent it. She called on a Wednesday morning. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 4 minutes long, and I listened to it once while sitting in my car in the driveway with the engine off. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said grief did things to people that they did not always recognize in themselves. She said the last few years had been so hard, and she knew that did not excuse anything, but she hoped I could understand that she was not in her right mind. She said she missed the girls. She said she had a right to know her grandchildren. She said that what happened with the house was a mistake, and she hoped we could put it behind us and focus on the future. She did not say she was sorry. She said it was a mistake. She said she hoped we could put it behind us. She said she was not in her right mind. These are different sentences from I was wrong and I am sorry, and I understand what I took from you. I listened to the voicemail once, wrote down the date and the key phrases in a notebook, and put the notebook on my desk. Then I called Nora in from the backyard where she was reading, and I called June in from whatever she was doing in her room, and I sat with them at the kitchen table, and I told them, in age-appropriate terms, what had happened with the house. What the will had said, what their great-grandmother had intended, what their grandmother had done. Nora listened without speaking. When I finished, she said, "So she took it, and you got it back?" I said, "Essentially, yes." She said, "How?" I said, "I kept records." I paid attention. "I got an attorney." June said, "Is she going to try again?" I said I did not think so, but that it was good to know what people were capable of. June thought about this for a moment, the way she thought about things, completely, with her chin in her hand. Then she said, "Is she going to be our grandmother now?" I said, "That is up to her, and it is up to us." June nodded. She said, "I have a grandmother, Grammy Helen." I said, "You have Grammy Helen." She said, "Good. That is enough." I did not reply to Patricia's voicemail, not that day, not that month. I left the door at the position where she had left it, which was to say not closed, but requiring her to come back with something different than what she had offered so far. Acknowledgement, accountability, the two words that had been absent from her 4-minute voicemail the way they had been absent from everything she had said and done in the preceding 2 years. If she ever found those words, I would be here. The door would be here. But I had learned something from my grandmother. Documents do not wait. Intentions put in writing do not dissolve because someone decides they should. What you put your name to matters. What you put in ink, in front of a witness, on a page that can be read by anyone, matters. My grandmother had put my name in ink. I had built a folder with 42 items. Between the two of us, we had kept a record accurate enough to stand up in court. Garrett called in September. He called on a Saturday afternoon, which meant Patricia was probably not in the room. He said, "I need to say something to you without lawyers involved." I said, "Okay." He said, "I was a coward. I knew the house was yours. I knew it the day Harold sent the will. I knew it the day Mom asked me to come to the notary. I knew it when I signed. I told myself it was complicated and that Mom had a case and that Harold had not been responsive, and I knew none of that was true. I just did not want to fight her. I have never been able to fight her. And you have always been able to, and I think I resented you for it without knowing that I did." I was quiet. He said, "I am sorry, Clara. That is it. That is what I called to say." I said, "Garrett, I believe you." He exhaled. I said, "I am not going to pretend that last year did not happen. But I believe that you are sorry. And I think there is a difference between being sorry and being someone I can trust. And we are going to have to figure out over time which one you turn out to be." He said, "That is fair," I said. "The girls might want to know their uncle." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I would like that, if you would let me." I said we would start slow. He said, "That is more than I deserve." I said, "It is exactly what you deserve, not more, not less." We hung up. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the photo on the fridge. Not a photo of Patricia. A photo of Daniel and the girls at the beach 2 summers ago. Nora on his shoulders, June holding his hand, all three of them squinting into the same low light. That was who I was doing all of this for. Not for the house, not for the money, not for the record, for them. For the girls who deserved to know that the things people put in writing meant something. That their great-grandmother had seen their mother clearly and had made a legal decision about it. That when someone tries to take what is yours, you do not have to accept the loss. You gather your documentation, you find your attorney, you stay steady and factual and clear-eyed, and you make the paperwork mean what it is supposed to mean. The binder, or in my case, the folder on my laptop with 42 dated items, was not a weapon. It was not revenge. It was a record. And records do not argue. They do not forgive or condemn. They just tell the truth. I had my grandmother's truth in a document signed in her handwriting 6 months before she died. I had my own truth in a folder labeled in red. Between the two of us, we had been careful enough. Here is what a year of loss taught me. Grief and documentation are not opposites. You can be devastated and still be precise. You can miss someone more than you have words for and still open a laptop at 2 a.m. and build a record because you know the record will matter. Keeping a record does not mean you are not heartbroken. It means you are heartbroken and also paying attention, which is harder, which takes more out of you, and which is sometimes the only thing that stands between you and losing what someone you loved intended for you to have. My grandmother was a woman who gave away tomatoes. She was also a woman who called Harold Birch's office twice in the last decade of her life to make sure her paperwork said what she meant. She was not naive about her oldest daughter. She loved Patricia. She also knew her. She had spent 60 years in proximity to that particular combination of entitlement and calculation, and she had decided, clearly, in writing, that this piece of ground should go to the granddaughter who showed up. She was not wrong about me. I showed up. Not because I expected anything from it. Not because I knew she was going to leave me her house, but because I wanted to know her. And she wanted to know me, and the drive to Denton was worth it for the coffee and the lavender dish soap and the Sunday calls at 7 p.m. That is the whole story. It is not complicated. Family is the people who call on Sundays. Family is the people who fly in and paint your daughter's bedroom. Family is the people who drive through the night when you need them and ask what you need and then actually do it. It is not the people who call after the Forbes mention. It is not the people who show up with an invoice when the numbers change. And documentation is not distrust. Documentation is love made legible. It is the note dated and initialed in a notebook so that someday when someone asks what happened, you will be able to tell them exactly, in order, with evidence. My grandmother documented her intentions in a will. I documented mine in a folder. The house is on Creekside Road, still exactly where she left it, with a new roof and a repaired porch and a garden that is going to have tomatoes again by August. The girls are going back this summer. That is my story. If it reminded you that the people who matter are the ones who show up when the world is small, not when the numbers get big, share it with someone who needs that today. Drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not.